channel, and there is reach out, and you're showing that they are very close.
Right, so that's what I was getting at, and you're right on it, which is, even though this looks like a very similar case, this is a case where we wouldn't want to use assignment of your school to treatment as an IV, precisely because we showed that living in a treatment community, even if you weren't treated yourself, your infection rates fall a lot because you're not getting reinfected. So which of the three IV assumptions fails because of externalities? Relevance, exogeneity, or exclusion? Exclusion. There's a direct effect of the IV on the outcome, not necessarily working through the channel of taking the drugs yourself. In cases where you have spillovers to treatment assignment like that, you can't use this IV approach. It's not valid. Is that an issue for Rebecca? Under what assumptions in the Thornton paper would the same issue hold? Ashley? Yeah, and that would be a big concern here. To the extent that the kind of really saturation of the program, like look, if only 1 out of 1,000 people in a local area got the incentive, it wouldn't really shift the local equilibrium very much. But if half the village is getting the incentive in the relevant age range, it could really shift sexual patterns in that area, even in the control group. So that would say, again, if I'm just like living in a community near treatment people, my outcomes are affected. And again, the IV approach wouldn't work. Yeah, TJ.
So with the randomization, you just changed the way that you randomize to address the externalities. Does that mean that in the face of externalities, IV is just at least about the way to
You know, if you remember from the midterm, you're going to get solutions to that. Some of these issues comes through in question 3, and the solutions go through that a bit. In that question on the midterm, and for one of the cases I specified, these villages are far enough away that they're not going to kind of affect each other. And the reason I emphasized that was precisely because I didn't want us to have to deal with these externalities, which complicates things. Now, that wasn't an IV example, but it complicates inference about what treatment effects are in a very similar way. Yeah?
I thought that you randomize your treatment, you don't want to mess up the IV at all, because introducing IV just blurs the direct causal link there, right? Why would you do that?
So maybe people can answer that. What would be a case, sticking to some of these health interventions, just because it's so concrete and because these methods are actually used in public health, what would be a kind of health intervention where this kind of encouragement design could be useful? I mean, let's say we don't believe it for Thornton. What would be another example where we're less concerned about some of these exclusion restriction violations? Yeah?
Maybe there is only a reinfection for it's not phased, then you're looking at externally?
Yeah, so maybe if there's no infection externalities, you won't have. I mean, the thing with the Thornton case that makes it complicated is the knowledge of HIV status doesn't itself generate an externality. It's just that there's this behavioral change that affects others' choices. So it would have to be like, this may not be a bad approach if we want to see the effect of a new cancer drug. So there's a cancer drug, there's a population of patients spread across the nation getting this experimental cancer drug, and 1 out of 3 of them refuse to take it for some reason. They don't want to, they tried something else, they were afraid to try something experimental, whatever it is. But there'd be no clear spillovers in that case. Can people think of any other examples? I will give you some sort of vocabulary which is useful, which is economists say reduced form, but if you hear people talking about this in health economics or public health, and we sometimes use this language, in the case of a health treatment assignment, people call this intention to treat, or ITT. In other words, the variable you look at is intention to treat, the assignment to treatment, not the actual treatment. That's what we would call the reduced form. What we call our IV estimate, another way to call that is what people call the treatment effect on the treated, or TOT. So that's just some other lingo that's used, but knowing that will kind of help you read certain papers. Sometimes they'll use more of this language, sometimes they'll use more of the this is more the econometrics language, and this is broader biostatistics language or something. Yeah?
Why is reduced form called ITT? Because, reduced form is the effect of the instruments on the
Yeah.
final health.
Yeah, this is the language in these encouragement studies. That should be really clear. So an encouragement study where the instrument is basically like the assignment to treatment or an incentive to get you to get treated, then the reduced form would be called the intention to treat. But if not everybody complies with assigned treatment, that's the language that's used. You have some non-compliance. The other language to know is non-compliance would be like an imperfect first stage. You guys kind of getting it now? So what we would call the first stage would really be the degree of compliance with assigned treatment. This is the kind of lingo that people use in this area. Okay. So any last thoughts on IV estimates, encouragement designs before we turn to corruption? Big stark shift in topics. Okay. So let's turn to corruption. What I want to do to illustrate why we care about this is just to build on an example from the economic shocks lectures in the course that we just completed. And go back to this issue of rainfall variability. So we've been talking a lot about rainfall variability, how it affects farmers, how it leads to violence, how very low rainfall years or years of crop shortages, and how one way to deal with those shocks is to save grain from year to year. So if I have a good harvest one year and I can save it to the next year, even if that's a drought year, I'll have enough to eat. That's a very important behavior in settings where, especially where the formal financial system is underdeveloped, where you can't necessarily save easily in a bank. There may be very high monthly fees. A bank may be far away. All the things we've been talking about. And one thing, when I was working in Tanzania about 10 years ago on this, and working with an NGO that was interested in these issues, one thing that became clear very, very quickly is if you are going to store grain from year to year, there are actually some big advantages to centralizing storage. So instead of everybody storing on their own farm, there could be an advantage to storing centrally. Why is that? If you store centrally, you can much more easily treat the grain. There are things you can do. So basically, when you store grain, it's sitting there, but it's subject to a lot of risk. There could be rodents in the storehouse. There are all kinds of different pests, weevils, molds, etc. that if there's some moisture in the grain, can rot the grain. And that can happen pretty quickly. But if you treat it, if you fumigate the grain, if you have different types of treatments, you can either put pellets in the grain, you can fumigate the grain, you kill all those pests. And then the grain can last longer. It's pretty simple. The problem with fumigating your grain, let's say I'm a farmer and I have 6 sacks of grain. For me to fumigate my grain may be a big deal. I have to get the equipment, I have to rent it, I have to find it. Maybe I can only rent it for a day, I have to travel a long distance to rent it. It's just not feasible, but there are big returns to scale. If 100 farmers like me filled a warehouse with our grain, one person could fumigate the whole room pretty quickly. So there are big scale economies to centralized storage. Those are the advantages. What are the disadvantages of centralized storage that you could think of? Yeah? That's right. So actually, bad stuff could spread even to more. If all of us have our grain on our 100 different farms, well, there's some idiosyncratic risk we get the mold, but it's not going to spread from my farm to your farm. But now there's a little bit of mold that may spread everywhere. So that's one. What's another one? Yeah. Exactly. So there's the advantage of scale economies of fumigation, but the disadvantage that now you have to move all this grain to one place, which if the roads are bad and transportation is costly, could be very difficult. If you keep it on your farm, zero transportation costs. You just take it from your field to your storehouse. Yeah. There could be a problem with theft. Now, of course, there could be theft in my own home, but a big grain store filled with valuable food may be a much juicier target for robbers, especially if it's a famine year. There may be a lot of people who want to get their hands on that grain. Yeah. There has to be trust, because not just theft could be an issue, but maybe the people managing it would steal it from you.
I was just going to say, the people managing it can really exploit the fact that they actually have the grain in your here, because
yeah.
people will be like, oh, it's actually 5% this year, but they actually go and ship that in, just because they'll start that otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to get my grain back. Now the guy managing the grain store says, well, pay me a little bit to get your grain. Right. Okay, it turns out, in this part of Tanzania that I was working in the same areas as the witch-killing paper, there were no centralized grain storage facilities at that time. And this was a puzzle for us. We were saying, look, there's all these fumigation advantages, scale economies. Why aren't there centralized storage facilities? And a lot of these issues started coming up in discussion. So here you guys have already anticipated, but I want to get people's views on which of these you think of as being the most important reason why there wasn't a centralized grain storage facility in the Attu, and then I'll give you the anecdote of what we found when talking to people in this district. So is it that actually the economic benefits are overrated, that maybe you don't actually store that much more from year to year if you fumigate, etc.? Are the transportation costs just really, really high and make it impossible to do this? So that was a point that came up. Is there really a lack of private entrepreneurs that would have the skills to manage a large-scale grain store and coordinate all the different shipments, etc.? Is there a lack of trust in the government to do this, or is it sort of all of the above? Okay, so there's a sort of clear winner here in terms of what people have answered. No one thinks the benefits are overrated. I guess we made the case those are important. A fair number of people think transportation costs are important, or there may be a lack of entrepreneurs, and those are certainly issues that came up in some discussions, but the really important one that came up, and I kind of anticipated this by talking about corruption and whatnot, is lack of trust in the government. But pretty much all of these came up. It turns out that there was an attempt to do centralized grain storage in Tanzania in the 70s. So in Tanzania in the 70s, there was a socialist government, very progressive government that had all these ideas about how to reorganize rural life, and over time became increasingly authoritarian when people didn't really go along with all their plans and sort of forcing people to comply with their plans. So they wanted everybody to live in centralized villages rather than living on these sort of spread out farms. After a few years of speeches where the president of Tanzania said, please live in centralized villages, and nobody moved, in the part of western Tanzania where Meatu is, they literally rounded people up, put them on trucks, said, okay, you have an hour, take all your belongings, we're moving you to centralized villages. So it became extremely heavy-handed. They started mandating crops people should grow and shouldn't grow, and they started pushing very strongly for people to save their grain not on their farms, but in centralized grain stores, given the purported efficiency advantages of centralized grain stores, which we talked about before. Fumigation. A few lectures. I was getting better there. Okay. Still working. Sorry about that. Jeez. Okay. And it turned out, for a couple years in the mid-70s, these grain stores were built, and a bunch of them were looted, presumably by government officials. That was the feeling. But basically, during that period where there was limited political accountability, people's lack of trust was actually very well founded. And since then, any effort, even by private entrepreneurs, to try to open grain stores met with lots of resistance. Because no one trusted anybody else with their grain. It was their lifeblood. Remember, after a drought year, remember how everything goes haywire in this part of Tanzania. So what do you need to do to have a profitable grain store? There's all the technical stuff, fumigation, you have to manage the logistics, you have to pay the transport costs, but you have to generate trust. There has to be enough trust that you're not going to steal people's grain. And the question is, how can you do that? And over the course of a couple of years, working with an NGO, we started planning out how they might do it. They actually rolled it out gradually in one village. They got a few farmers who were willing to save their grain in the common grain store. But there were a couple of very specific design features of these grain stores that in discussions with people in this one village had to be implemented. So here's what they were. A, people did not allow their grain to be pooled into like a common silo. So that's one way to very efficiently store grain. You pool it together, fumigate it all. They insisted that their grain be kept in their own sacks. You can still fumigate if the grain's in the sacks, it's just less effective, but people insisted that it stayed in their own sacks with their names on it. Because they thought other people were going to put really low quality, already rotting grain into the grain store, but then withdraw good grain that other farmers had put in. So there's a lack of trust not just of the NGO or the government, but of other people in the village. Okay, so that was one. The second one, even though this was put in a very secure building with good locks and whatnot, there was an insistence that there be a grating, an open grating that you could look through at all times to see that your grain was still there. So there was a metal door installed with a window and a grating, and you could look in and see the tag where your grain was stored. That was incredibly important. Without that, people would not have wanted to put their grain in the grain store. And then because the village that was chosen wasn't right by the district capital where the NGO was, they set days, it was 2 days a week, where the same NGO staff member would go and spend the morning allowing people to either deposit grain or withdraw grain. And there were records kept of exactly how much you put in and put out. It was sort of a well-known time that he was going to be there. At no other times could it be done. And that was good because it facilitated monitoring. Everybody knew he was going to be there during that time, and you could just make sure nothing kind of fishy was going on. So there was a really widespread lack of trust. That said, the grain store took off. So after that first year, in the second year, a lot more farmers in that area put their grain in that grain store. The NGO opened a second grain store. And so it turned out to be a little mini success story, but it took a long time to figure out how to design it to be appropriate for this setting. A low trust setting, basically. Let me pause for a second and see if there were questions.
I'm just curious, some of these conditions, what's the typical failure rate of the fumigation process? So like something's going to be less lucky, because I can see like that happening one time numbers really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. Imagine if in the first year there was just bad luck and for some reason there was some rotting, it wouldn't be very good. I don't know those statistics perfectly. There was a time when I knew those percentages better than I do now, but the fumigation, my understanding is quite effective, actually. There's other things. Another thing that's an issue is rats and rodents. So in the grain store, they actually elevate. This is very typical in grain stores of this kind. You elevate the grain, which makes it that much harder for the rodents to get to. And plus you can see where the rodents are, you can clean the floor better and stuff. If you put the grain right on the floor, things can hide in there and sort of eat the grain. So there's a whole set of things you need to do. Yeah. Yeah, so this was kind of a sad story. This was 2004, and then into 2005, and the program is going quite well into 2006. So they started setting up additional ones. What ended up happening that time, this NGO partner we were working with had a change of leadership. It was a Dutch NGO, just random fact. That's where they got their money from. It was an international NGO. And the new leadership of the NGO didn't want to emphasize agriculture, health, or education, which were the things we were working with them on. So as of the end of 2006, we stopped working with them, and they kind of, over the next year, shut down all their agriculture, health, and education projects. And they became very interested in a very interesting issue. The new executive director of the NGO was very interested in children's legal rights and wanted to turn the NGO effectively into an advocacy organization within Kenya and Tanzania, pushing for legal reforms to empower children. So it's a definitely worthwhile aim. But it was a very radical change. So all the kind of researchers and a lot of the staff kind of stopped working with that NGO, and the grain stores stopped. And I don't think anybody else implemented it. I could be wrong. I haven't been to Meatu in a few years. So that's a bit of a shame. Yeah.
How like profitable was this with NGO? Like the entrepreneur do the same setup?
That's something that at the time we talked about, and that comes up again and again when people talk about grain storage. That in theory, it really looks like there are potentially very high profits to doing this. And then you have to ask the question, why more aren't doing it? And why did this NGO succeed when a government couldn't do it, or maybe when private entrepreneurs couldn't do it? I think the big fear when we talk to people, when we ask that question, they would say, well, look, in a normal year, this would be very profitable. That's not going to be the problem. The problem is going to be in a drought year. So in a drought year, if you're a private entrepreneur with a massive store facility of grain, there's going to be a lot of public, popular, and political pressure on you to sell that grain. There could be theft, there could be looting, and would the police stop looters? Like if there really is hunger in a given year, will the police really stop looters from looting your grain storage facility? And I think that's the question that would, of course, that would undermine the profitability of the whole enterprise, because in the drought year or famine year, profitability would be particularly high because grain prices go up. Of course, the grain is very valuable in those years, so charging a high price for it in some sense sort of reflects its social value. People really need the grain that year, and in the long run, if lots of people are able to save more, price levels would fall in those drought years. So what I'm saying, so if there were greater availability, price spikes wouldn't be as high in those years, but the risk of expropriation makes it much less attractive to save. So it's a kind of political and institutional issue to some extent.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't borrowing for your actual input wasn't a real issue. Many people are engaging in trading.
You're saying just to have enough to be productive? And
Well, no, it's like in Southeast Asia before, there's the resistance to storing grain because you have to borrow money to cover your fertilizer as a basic
I see.
cost. And then
Oh, you have to pay it off with your grain. Oh, I see.
You have to pay off the interest. If you
Yeah.
have it now, you don't have actually any savings.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and there's certainly the same tendency in East Africa and farmers we've talked to. That's right. Right after the harvest, instead of saving, which could be very profitable, so if there is a drought year or in the hungry season, extra prices go up, you ideally like to save, but you're so busy paying off all the loans you took to do this harvest, you don't do it. So actually, a project that Marshall Burke, who spoke in the class, and I are working on in Kenya, is providing credit to farmers at exactly that point. So it seems counterintuitive. You would say, oh, farmers need credit before the harvest so they can invest in inputs and have a good harvest. That's true. That credit's useful. But credit could also be useful right after the harvest to enable you to basically save your grain to take advantage of anticipated future price increases. So we're in the midst of studying that right now, and I think your intuition is sort of what drove us to start working on that experiment. Okay, so let's talk about corruption. So, corruption can matter. We know that storing grain is important, and this part of Tanzania, a failed government scheme really undermined trust in probably public and private grain storage with potentially awful circumstances. So, corruption is discussed a lot in development, and we'll sort of we'll chat about that a bit today. And next time, people often point to corruption as a major impediment to development or the key impediment to development. There's some reasons why. It could undermine the effectiveness of programs like grain storage programs. It could undermine the effectiveness of education and health programs. One of the readings on the reading list, which I think you guys will talk about in section next, is the Reinecker and Svensson article that shows how much money was effectively misused in Uganda in an education program in the 1990s. Has anybody read that article yet? Does anybody remember the headline number of what percent of money was stolen? Yeah, they received 13%. 87% they estimate was stolen. Now that's a pretty extreme case. There's a bunch of other African surveys where it's only estimated that 40 to 60% of the money is stolen. So sort of tongue-in-cheek there. If it's 40 to 60%, that's still a massive issue. So clearly this could be important. And so let's think about it and define it. The way corruption is often defined is using this this sort of phrase on the slide: the abuse of public office for private gain. So clearly, if I'm a public official charged with managing a grain storage facility and I steal all the grain, that's abusing my public office. But abusing a public office could, of course, take many forms. It could be, instead of issuing licenses when I should, I demand a bribe. It could be introducing other forms of red tape into official procedures, all the way up to extortion. But it's relative. What is corruption? What is the abuse of public office for private gain? Are campaign contributions basically corruption? So let me think. I'm a public official running for Congress. I take campaign contributions from a lobbyist. No quid pro quo, we're always told. Sure. Come on. So this person's basically buying influence with me, and that's private gain for me. I get to have his staff. I become a congressperson. We go on all these fancy trips together because they're lobbying me. Maybe that's corruption too. And beyond sort of difficulties in definition, there's very, very serious difficulties with measurement. So if you thought measuring health was hard, try measuring corruption. These are illegal acts. No one is going to be reporting these acts. You have to be very creative to do empirical research on corruption. You have to come up with new measures. There's actually a sort of a phrase that people sometimes use